The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind's Bloodmoon DLC is the second and last of the major expansions to be released for this title. Having come out on June 3rd, 2003, fans still hold this DLC near and dear to their hearts. Not too long ago on this channel, I went through the Tribunal expansion for the first time and had a blast. Since then, a lot of people have been wondering when I'd be tackling Bloodmoon, and well, today's the day. In this playthrough, I'll be experiencing the main questline for the first time, enjoying the dialogue, story, extra lore, new NPCs and enemies, as well as the new location of Solstheim and all of its dungeons. I'll be doing it through a narration style, and without further ado, let's begin. Bloodmoon can be started pretty much as soon as Morrowind is loaded up. For me, I remember it being one of the first things I learned about when I started playing this game a couple months back. Through rumors and various conversations, you'll hear the NPCs talk about an island to the north called Solstheim and an Imperial outpost on it called Fort Frostmoth. Everyone emphasizes how miserable life must be over there, and they'll mention there's a boat in Cool that can take anyone brave or dumb enough to go. Before going anywhere, I made sure to stock up on my most powerful weapons, armor, and gear. Tribunal threw some curveballs at me, so I wanted to be sure that I was nice and prepared for what was to come. Eager to start a new adventure in an unknown place, I took various boat passages through the fishing villages until I finally landed in Cool. Approaching the Khajiit ferryman, Severe, he actually had some unique dialogue.
Hurry, hurry, last boat to Solstheim, until the next one.
Speaking with him, he asked if I needed transportation over to Solstheim. For a fee, he'll drop me off right at the front step of Fort Frostmoth. Paying the 35 gold for passage, I was brought over to the final frontier. To the west, I could see the wilderness, trees, rocks, and rolling hills. To the north was the aforementioned Imperial outpost. Aching to make connections and wanting to hear some stories, I chatted with the Argonian Basques in the Sun. He was the ferryman who'd bring me back to Vvardenfell. He welcomed me to the island and threw in a bit of sarcasm. He called Solstheim a miserable place and said that he'd always be happy to bring me back to a warmer climate. However, if I'm insistent on staying here, Basques suggests speaking with Captain Carius, the commander of Fort Frostmoth, or Carnius Magius, someone who's attempting to form a colony here. Now, from what I do know, speaking with the captain initiates the main questline, and speaking with Carnius begins the East Empire Company questline. An enticing adventure in of itself, but I'll leave that one for another day. As the sun was setting, I figured it'd be a good idea to funnel into the fort. I prefer to explore with the game and its story, as opposed to going out on my own. Frostmoth was similar to most of the forts that I've seen back on Vvardenfell. The structure, layout, and architecture. The only difference was the garrison station here. The guards seemed dismissive and caught up in their own heads, which was something I thought to be strange. Chatting with one of them, he asked what I wanted and then gave me specific instructions on how to reach Carius. Entering the general quarters, I was quickly met with my biggest peeve of Morrowind: tight spaces and patrolling guards. You could probably scroll through the amount of times I needed to toggle collision with console commands. Ascending the spiral staircase and reaching the third floor, I entered the captain's chambers and saw Carius standing on the opposite end. With that, thus ends the introductory quest to Bloodmoon, an island to the north. Ready to embark on a new journey, I approached the Imperial. He opened by asking what he could do for me and that he was the commander of the fort. Inquiring about Frostmoth, Falk says that the garrison here has the potential to be among the best in the Legion. However, Solstheim isn't the easiest to be stationed at, and often the soldiers are on edge. Asking what he means by that, Carius explains that the living conditions for the troops aren't the best, and being all the way out here means they're separated from their loved ones. He reveals though that most of the soldiers were actually sent here through punishment. Instead of incarceration or execution, they were exiled here and forced to patrol its frosty walls. Only recently did the soldiers start to demonstrate some disturbing trends. When asked about them, Carius says that the men and women have been restless and whiny. They've been rather unenthused with their duties, and Falk senses unease amongst them. Overall morale has been low. He jumps to the conclusion that someone in the ranks is causing these trends, or, as he puts it, adding fuel to the flames. He wants to know who, and concedes that the other troops would never come forward with that information. However, somebody like me, a stranger to these parts, might be able to get through to them and uncover the truth. The captain gives me my first task, and I go on my way. Fort Frostmoth is a pretty miserable place, and it doesn't surprise me that the soldiers just want to go home, especially considering they aren't that loyal or hardworking. The first guard I lay eyes on is a Pat in the stairwell. Chatting with him, he gives me a rather dismissive line. He says he's got nothing to say, but could use a drink. Nothing Nordic though. In fact, going and talking with pretty much every single guard here, they all say the same message. So, taking it as a hint that they want to drink alcohol, I set out for finding some of the hard stuff. I figured that there had to be a bottle or two lying around the fort, but I also assumed that it wouldn't be in an easy to reach place, or else the troops wouldn't be complaining. I searched through storage rooms, looked in containers, baskets, and chests, then on some out of sight shelves and in private quarters. I didn't find much. In fact, I didn't really find anything interesting at all, which was kind of a bummer. No cool weapons, armor, notes, pieces of lore, etc. Although I didn't look too hard nor too far for those. Finally, I ended up finding some of the quest items in the captain's quarters. In both of the side rooms, he had bottles of Flynn and Grief laying around. I figured he wouldn't miss them, and it was all in the name of the task he had set out for me. Exiting Carius' space, I was pretty much hard blocked by a legionnaire on the stairs, so I decided to use him as my information source. Speaking with the guard, he asked if that was booze he smelled on me. He recognized the scent of Flynn and asked for a little quote-unquote pick-me-up. Handing the bottle over, he seemed at ease and grateful, mentioning that things haven't been the same around here since alcohol stopped arriving at the fort. Questioning what he meant, apparently, Captain Falks himself signed the order that this was to be a dry fort. In the guard's eyes, it really didn't make sense though, since the captain has always seemed rather lax with the amenities. The Pat specifically calls out the ban of alcohol as the reason to why everybody's in a bad mood. Well, problem solved. I turned right around, went back into Falks' quarters, and told him what I had learned.
I asked you to investigate why the morale has been low in the fort. Have you learned anything?
Carius' response was quite interesting. He said he figured the lack of alcohol would have had an impact on the troops' mood, but he never outright banned it from the fort. Apparently, the decision for less booze came after a conversation with the priest, Antonius Nuncius. Nuncius had concerns about the effects of drinking and the garrison's productivity. As such, the shipments of alcohol stopped coming in months ago. Carius wants me to do some more digging and find out what's really going on here. Heading back into the stairwell and out into the courtyard, I figured I'd give another guard some time in the limelight. I noticed that there were two unique NPCs across the way, Vilbia Herenia and Raken. Chatting with Vilbia, word has apparently already gotten around that I'm investigating why Frostmoth is a dry fort. Telling her that, yes I am, she says that this conversation would be easier if she had something to drink, but will divulge anyways. All Herenia really knows is that Antonius Nuncius, the priest, told the garrison that Captain Falks banned alcohol, and from there, the stores ran dry. Lastly, she tells me that Antonius can either be found in the cult shrine or in his office atop the armory. This is important to note for later. Deciding that it's high time to pay Nuncius a visit, I entered the Imperial Shrine and saw the man standing around in one of the side rooms. He looked like a unit of an NPC, and I couldn't help but think he was designed a little strangely. That adds perfectly to the story though. Speaking with Antonius, I brought up the dry fort. He replied that it was quite odd the captain would do such a thing, and that some people's logic just doesn't make sense. This is where I was able to call him out on the lie and say that Carius never passed the ban. Nuncius gets caught up in his words and admits that the ban was never made official. However, he does bring up that the shipments stopped coming in, and that's plenty enough reason to blame Falks. When questioned about the shipments, Antonius becomes defensive and then turns angry. He names himself a simple priest who doesn't partake in the fort's politics. He calls the soldiers pathetic and curses this terrible frozen excuse of an island. Nuncius claims to not care that the alcohol never came in, says he's innocent and that nothing can be pinned on him. He then forcefully exits the conversation. It seems like I might have just found suspect number one, but he's right. I need proof in order to do anything. Remembering what Herenia had said, the priest has an office atop the armory, so there's a good chance that I might find what I'm looking for there. Moseying across the courtyard and back to the interior, I ascended the stairs and into one of the side rooms. Here, I located Nuncius' desk and unlocked it via spell. Inside, I found all the evidence I could ever need. several bottles of alcohol, things like Sujama, Flynn, brandy, etc., and even a bottle of skooma. Receiving the journal update and taking his gold for my troubles, I went back over to the shrine and confronted the Imperial with my findings. Again, Antonius was at a loss for words and shocked that I went as far as searching through his desk. Finally though, after being caught in a web of lies, he admits to being the one who stole all of the alcohol. His reasoning was that it was for the good of the garrison and that in a perfect world, all of the soldiers become fed up and desert their posts, allowing everybody to go home. Antonius pleads with me to not tell the captain, and I'm prompted to either keep his secret or to report him. Admittedly, I thought I could double-cross Nuncius and reap several rewards, so I assured him that I wouldn't be saying anything. As an expression of his gratitude, he hands me a key and directs me to a closet back up in his office. Apparently, that's where the rest of the alcohol is stashed, and I'm free to do whatever I please with it. Checking it out on my own time, there's 10 bottles of each liquor in there, which if anything, would fetch for a nice chunk of change at the general store. In any case, mystery solved, I returned to Falks and informed him of what I had learned. Unfortunately, there was no option to double-cross Nuncius. The game made me stick to my word, and as such, the captain only rewarded me with 3 potions of Cure Common Disease. Carius says that there are diseases here I've likely never encountered before. However, with Nerevarine status making me practically immune to everything, I don't think it'll be that much of an issue. As for the story I gave him, he calls it ridiculous that a miscommunication like that could have occurred here at Frostmoth. He takes the blame mostly onto himself and says that the standards here need to rise. With that nice little introduction to the fort and its current political climate out of the way, thus ends the quest, Rebellion at Frostmoth. Feeling like I've only just scratched the surface, I returned to Carius and resumed our conversation. He mentioned that I could likely help him deal with a whole other issue here at the fort. Inquiring about it, Falk says that the trust between him and his men is wearing thin. Since a lot of the troops are criminals sent over from Ebonheart, he fears as though their old habits have leaked over into their new lives. The captain believes that weapons are being smuggled out of Solstheim and into Vardenfell. The armory supplies are decreasing and there's no record of why or what for. He wants me to get to the bottom of it and offers a little extra help. He directs me to the best soldiers here at Frostmoth and tells me to work with one of them on the case. Sanus Lucius is well liked and has a silver tongue, but his combat skills aren't up to snuff. Gaia Artoria, on the other hand, is a fearsome warrior, but she doesn't have the same charisma as Lucius does. My thought process was that I personally had the combat portion covered. I had really good armor and 2 of the most powerful weapons in the game. How difficult could this next portion really be? As it would turn out, very, but in any case, I descended down a level and found the young Sanus.
Captain Carius mentioned that you might come to speak with me. How may I assist you?
Bringing up the smuggling ring and how the captain wants us to work together, Lucius says he'd be glad to help out, but reiterates that he's not much of a fighter. Here, I'm prompted to make the commitment of having him as a follower, and of course, I double down. Like mentioned before, I thought I could handle the fighting. It was the speechcraft and personality part that I needed some help with. Leading the Imperial out into the courtyard, I figured the best place to start asking around was amongst the soldiers. Picking a random guard and mentioning the weapons, he directed me over to someone named Zenofaustus in the armory. Wandering back inside the fort and looking around, I soon landed on Zeno and brought up the smuggling. It seems like my choice of followers was already starting to pay off. Faustus said that because I'm here with Lucius, he can put his trust in me. Word around the fort is that the missing weapons are being stashed in a place called Gandrung Caverns, which is northeast of Frostmoth. Zeno warns me that if I go looking for them, there will likely be blood. He does hint though that there may be a way to avoid the bloodshed, and I'm assuming that's with Lucius's help. So, it's finally time to venture outside the fort, a moment I've been waiting for. With Lucius on my tail, we exit Fort Frostmoth and wander into Solstheim's wilderness. To be honest, I really welcome the change of scenery. I feel like much of Vardenfell is gray and void of color, so the pine trees, deep greenery, rocky formations, and even snow were a sight for sore eyes. Very quickly into my adventure, I spotted a brand new enemy. It was one that I recognized from other Elder Scrolls games, but had no clue just how different it was going to be in Bloodmoon. Spriggans are quite the fearsome foes in Oblivion and Skyrim, but here in Morrowind, I feel like they're on a whole new level. Their faces are unironically unsettling, their screams are deafening, and worst of all, they need to be killed 3 times in order to stay dead. It was a battle I wasn't prepared for, and because of it, Sanus quickly lost his life. It's too early for casualties though, so running it back and stringing him along, I continued the journey with him. Every so often, I could hear a wolf's howl in the distance. Obviously, I know there's a specific mythical creature that's involved with this expansion, so I wondered if that noise was coming from said beast, or if it was just added in for the player's immersion. Wanting to regen my bars, I rested for a bit, only to be jump scared by a grizzly bear. This thing was massive and powerful. Fortunately, me and Sanus were able to deal with it quickly and finish our regeneration. I didn't know exactly how far northeast the Gandrung Caverns were. It turns out that I ended up running right past them pretty early into this expedition. Lucius and I ran through rivers, trees, and rolling hills. We faced new enemies like wolves, boars, and bandits wearing animal furs. I came across the fan favorite Horker, which brought me a lot of joy. It started to snow on Solstheim, which was a really strange thing to see here in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. I found other dungeons, but not the one I was looking for. Finally, after retracing my steps, I located the Gandrung Caverns and saw just how close it really was to Fort Frostmoth. In any case, I got to explore a bit, and now it was back to the task at hand. Going on inside, the first enemies I came across were rats, which of course were nothing more than a joke. Thinking this was going to be easy, I went a little more in and received the humbling of a lifetime. An Imperial soldier came sprinting from around the corner and smacked me with his axe. This axe had a paralysis enchantment and it froze my character in place. From there, Lucius was no match for the rogue legionnaire and both of us succumbed to our wounds. Trying again, this time I made sure to use Sanus as a meat shield while I supplied the DPS. Even through direct hits with True Flame, the soldier's health was going down rather slowly. For this fight, Sanus died first, and I figured it was time to get serious. As him and I moved through the dungeon, killing more rats, we periodically ran into more crooked legionnaires. Keeping the strategy of using my companion as a tank, I spammed my attacks and focused on KOing the opponents as quickly as possible. Magic really was the unsung hero here, as getting a powerful enough tack off before the assault began would work wonders in ending the tussle quickly. After some meandering and traversing, I got to the end of the line and caught the attention of one last soldier. As he came charging in, he all of a sudden stopped and sparked up a conversation. Galtira Spurius, the ringleader, heard that I was here with Sanus Lucius and chose to strike up a deal with me. If I let Spurius leave Solstheim unharmed, he'll abandon the smuggling operation and desert the Legion, putting an end to the weapons shortage. He even offers to throw in an axe as a bonus to sweeten the deal. Pausing the conversation and turning to Sanus, I asked him for his advice. The young legionnaire tells me that Spurius is a decent fighter and could prove to be a challenge. He does, however, have a family back home and was likely trying to support them through these means. Whichever decision I choose, Lucius will stand by it. Returning to Galtiris, I thought about letting him go, and then decided that I didn't want to deal with any loose ends. So, taking advantage of his non-hostility, I let off a frost spell, lowering his health by a third, and then cut him down using Hope's Fire. With a group of smugglers deceased and the Gandrung Caverns looted, Sanus and I returned to Fort Frostmoth. That was certainly a more challenging crawl than I thought it'd be. Admittedly, I actually forgot to make the truce with Galtiris and only killed him for curiosity's sake. The plan was to revert the save and go through with the pact, but I figured the fate of the smugglers likely didn't have much of an overall impact on the plot. I'm unsure where I thought this story was going to go from here, but I really wasn't expecting this. Upon my return to the outpost, I noticed that the outer walls were destroyed. Looking a bit further, the courtyard was also in ruins, and even the inner walls, indicating that some battle took place while I was gone. With that, thus ends the quest, the Frostmoth Smugglers. Wanting to know what's going on here, I approached a guard and spoke with him. He was still troubled by the recent events, mentioning unknown creatures and the captain. The Pat then directs me to Gea Artoria, Carius' other trusted soldier. Still confused on what happened, I entered the general quarters and ascended to the captain's chambers. Falks was nowhere to be seen. Heading back down and going into the upper level of the quarters, I spotted Artoria at the back of the room.
You're back, and just in time.
Chatting with her, she was also distressed and remarked that the so-called creatures from the battle took Captain Carius. Oddly enough, she calls out Lucius as being dead too, even though he's right behind me. Inquiring about the captain, Gaia reveals what happened while I was gone. Some kind of wolf-like creatures attacked the fort. Their numbers were plenty, but the soldiers were able to fight them off, including Falks. After the battle was over, no one could find Carius. Nobody saw him die, so the best guess was that he was hauled away as a prisoner of war, or perhaps worse. Artoria thinks that some Nords in a village to the north had something to do with the attack. Getting more info on the wolf creatures, Gaia drops a bomb and says that she thinks that they were werewolves. However, she's never known the beasts to gather in large packs like that, nor is it normal for them to carry out an organized assault. Furthermore, it's strange for werewolves to be here on Solstheim in the first place, as the population is just so small. Legend has it that the Nords to the north are able to control beasts, and even turn into them. Inquiring about the village, she marks it on my map and tells me a bit more about its inhabitants. The Skull worship and revere nature. This includes animals too, like wolves and bears. This is where Artoria draws the parallel to an organized werewolf attack. She's positive they'll have info on the captain and tells me to stay with them until I get the answer. As a sort of peace offering / honorable gift, she gives me the skull of a Skull warrior, which she thinks will earn me the tribe's respect. Looking at the map, it appears as though their village is on the north side of the island. So, like it or not, there's going to be much more Solstheim exploration. Most of the enemies surrounding the fort were Spriggans, animals, and bandits. Spriggans aren't too difficult to face, the fights are just too time-consuming and rather tedious. Along the way, I came across a group of warriors clad in matching armor. They were called Reavers, and I wondered what their story was. They seemed a little more clan-like than the usual bandit rabble that I've come across. Continuing the journey, I found the first piece of housing I've seen here on Solstheim. Upon getting closer, I saw that it belonged to someone named Uncle Sweetshare.
Candy, candy, he makes so much. Uncle Sweetshare has a magic touch. So it's back to the workshop in the snow, with lovely lanterns all aglow. Hee-hee, ha-ho, hee-hee-hee, ha-ha-ho.
I figured I'd leave that one for another day. Besides, outside of Uncle's workshop, I spotted a dead Khajiit in the snow and knew that this was probably going to be a whole can of worms. Once I went far enough north and the island turned into a snowy tundra, the enemies started to change a bit too. I encountered these small, goblin-like creatures called Reeklings. What's more, some of these beings were mounted on boar's back and called Reekling Raiders. This gave them increased movement speed and strength. For now, they weren't too much to worry about, but that would soon change. Just past them though was the Skull village. The community here seemed like they were thriving, built up, and organized. They weren't hostile towards me, and upon approaching them, they gave me strict instructions. Since I'm not Skull, I'm to speak with their leader, Tharstan Heartfang, in the Great Hall. Not wanting to cause any trouble, that's exactly what I did. Again, the architecture here on Solstheim is really unique to what I've seen on Vardenfell and Mournhold. It felt like a winter wonderland with log cabins and grand hearths, although the tone wasn't exactly overly pleasant or welcoming. Stepping into the Great Hall, I located their leader, Tharstan, at the back of the room and spoke with him.
What do you want, stranger? Why are you among the Skull?
He asked what I had wanted and said that the Skull won't harm me. However, I would do well to remember my manners and to be respectful here. Apparently, word has spread of the attack at Fort Frostmoth. Inquiring about what he knows, Heartfang rags on the Imperials and shows his clear disdain for them. The feelings that Artoria expressed towards the Skull clearly go both ways. However, Tharstan says that the clan would never do such a thing, joking that they prefer to watch the Legion die slowly from their own incompetence. As for the creatures that attack them, all he says is that they're not native to Solstheim. He asks if that concludes my business here. Putting a pin in the conversation, in order to mark this quest as complete, I need to return to Fort Frostmoth and inform Artoria of what I've learned. Albeit, it isn't much, and only absolves the Skull of blame, and that's if she's willing to buy their response.
You've got to find the captain. The fort needs him.
Gaia asks me if I was able to find the captain, to which I tell her no, and that the Skull don't know where he is either. She of course doesn't believe it, and says that I need to get closer to them, befriend their clan, live amongst them, and learn as much as I can. She tells me not to worry about the fort, and to just focus on finding Falks. With that, thus ends the quest, the disappearance of Captain Carius. Jumping back to my conversation with Tharstan Heartfang, I explored the dialogue option of why my character was here at their village. This prompt had me hand over the skull of a Skull warrior, and Tharstan had some things to say about that. He called out the Imperials on their ignorance, saying that they should just let nature be. However, he does appreciate that it was returned to the clan, and thinks that perhaps there's redemption for me yet. I'm welcomed into their home, but there's apparently a lot to atone for still. Unsure as to what he means, I inquired about it. Heartfang calls out the Imperial settlers as being bringers of destruction. They have no care or regard for something called the Oneness. Oneness is apparently the balance that's here on Solstheim. Nature, trees, land, animals, water, etc. Everything that connects them. In order to restore this balance, an entity called the Allmaker must be appeased, and Tharstan wants me to be the one to make things right for the Skull. I'm to speak with someone named Korst Windeye, the shaman of the clan, for further instructions on what to do. Obviously, things here in the Skull Village don't seem amazing, but at first glance they don't seem that bad either. I wondered how exactly the Skull were struggling beyond any normal trials and tribulations. What would restoring their power look like? Am I being manipulated by the Nords? Do they intend to wipe out Fort Frostmoth with some lost ability, or are they just really down on their luck? Well, in order to receive that answer, it's time to speak with a shaman. Locating the spiritual leader's hut, I went on in and came across Windeye.
Greetings to you, Wanderer. Why have you returned to our village?
Asking him about restoring the power, Korst informs me that a specific ritual must be completed. It involves 6 standing stones, and each stone represents a gift from the Allmaker. Each stone also has its own unique task that must be performed. After all 6 tasks are completed, the oneness is then restored. Sounding simple enough, I asked him for further details on the ritual of the gifts. This is where the shaman hands me 2 pieces of paper. One is called the story of Avar Stonesinger, and the other is the locations of the stones. Korst suggests that I familiarize myself with both texts if I intend to remain with the Skull. I decided to crack into the story of Avar Stonesinger first. I honestly loved this read. The narration style is excellent, the story is entertaining, and it's relevant to the next chapter of gameplay. It's incredibly charming, but it's also a really long read. I highly encourage you to stick around for it, but if not, feel free to skip ahead. The story goes as follows. Sit quietly, child, and listen, for the story I tell you is a story of the ages. But what is it, grandfather? Is it a story of heroes and beasts? The grandfather looked patiently at the child. He was growing into a fine boy. Soon he would see the value in the stories, the lessons that were taught to each generation. Just listen, child. Let the story take root in your heart. In a time before now, long before now, when the Skull were new, there was peace in the land. The sun was hot, and the crops grew long, and the people were happy in the peace that the Allmaker provided. But the Skull grew complacent and lazy, and they took for granted the lands and all the gifts the Allmaker had given them. They forgot, or chose not to remember, that the adversary is always watching, and that he delights in tormenting the Allmaker and his chosen people. And so, it was the adversary who came to be among the Skull. The adversary has many aspects. He appears in the unholy beasts and their incurable plague. At the end of seasons, we will know him as Thartag the World Devourer, but in these ages, he came to be known as the Greedy Man. The Greedy Man, that is what we will call him, for to speak his name would certainly bring ruin on the people, lived among the Skull for many months. Perhaps he was once just a man, but when the adversary entered into him, he became the Greedy Man, and that is how he's remembered. It came to be one day that the powers of the Skull left them. The strength left the arms of the warriors, and the shaman could no longer summon the beasts to their side. The elders thought that surely the Allmaker was displeased, and some suggested that the Allmaker had left them forever. It was then that the Greedy Man appeared to them and spoke. You of the Skull have grown fat and lazy. I have stolen the gifts of your Allmaker. I have stolen the oceans, so you will forever know thirst. I have stolen the lands and the trees and the sun, so your crops will wither and die. I have stolen the beasts, so you will go hungry. And I have stolen the winds, so you will live without the spirit of the Allmaker. And until one of you can reclaim these gifts, the Skull will live in misery and despair. For I am the Greedy Man, and that is my nature. And the Greedy Man disappeared. The members of the Skull spoke for many days and nights. They knew that one of them must retrieve the gifts of the Allmaker, but they could not decide who it should be. "I cannot go," said the elder, "for I must stay to lead the skull and tell our people what is the law." "I cannot go," said the warrior, "for I must protect the skull. My sword will be needed in case the greedy man reappears." "I cannot go," said the shaman, "for the people need my wisdom. I must read the portents and offer my knowledge." It was then that a young man called Avar lifted his voice. He was strong of arm and fleet of foot, though he was not yet a warrior of the skull. "I will go," said Avar, and the skull laughed. "Hear me out," the boy continued. "I am not yet a warrior, so my sword will not be needed. I cannot read the portents, so the people will not seek my counsel. And I am young and not yet wise in the ways of the law. I will retrieve the gifts of the Allmaker from the greedy man. If I cannot, I will not be missed." The skull thought on this briefly and decided to let Avar go. He left the village the next morning to retrieve the gifts. Avar first set out to retrieve the gift of water, so he traveled to the Waterstone. It was there the Allmaker first spoke to him. "Travel west to the sea and follow the swimmer to the waters of life." So Avar walked to the edge of the ocean, and there was the swimmer, a black horker sent from the Allmaker. The swimmer dove into the waters and swam very far, and far again. Avar was strong though, and he swam hard. He followed the swimmer to a cave, swimming deeper and deeper, his lungs burning and his limbs exhausted. At last, he found a pocket of air, and there, in the dark, he found the waters of life. Gathering his strength, he took the waters and swam back to the shore. Upon returning to the Waterstone, the Allmaker spoke. "You've returned the gift of water to the skull. The oceans again will bear fruit, and their thirst will be quenched." Avar then traveled to the Earthstone, and there the Allmaker spoke to him again. "Enter the cave of the hidden music, and hear the song of the earth." So Avar traveled north and east to the cave of the hidden music. He found himself in a large cavern where the rocks hung from the ceiling and grew from the ground itself. He listened there and heard the song of the earth, but it was faint. Grabbing up his mace, he struck the rocks of the floor in time with the song, and the song grew louder, until it filled the cavern and his heart. Then he returned to the Earthstone. "The gift of the earth is with the skull again," said the Allmaker. "The lands are rich again and will bear life." Avar was tired, as the sun burned him, the trees offered no shade, and there was no wind to cool him. Still, he traveled onto the Beast Rock, and the Allmaker spoke. "Find the good beast and ease his suffering." Avar traveled through the woods of the Isenfir for many hours until he heard the cries of a bear from over a hill. As he crested a hill, he saw the bear, a Falmer's arrow piercing its neck. He checked the woods for the Falmer, for that is what they were, though some say they are not, and finding none, approached the beast. He spoke soothing words and came upon it slowly, saying, "Good beast, I mean you no harm. The Allmaker has sent me to ease your suffering." Hearing these words, the bear ceased his struggles and laid his head at Avar's feet. Avar grasped the arrow and pulled it from the bear's neck. Using the little nature magic he knew, Avar tended the wound, though it took the last bit of his strength. As the bear's wound closed, Avar slept. When he awoke, the bear stood over him, and the remains of a number of the Falmer were strewn about. He knew that the good beast had protected him during the night. He traveled back to Beast Rock, the bear by his side, and the Allmaker spoke to him again. "You have returned the gift of the beasts. Once again, the good beasts will feed the skull when they are hungry, clothe them when they are cold, and protect them in times of need." Avar's strength had returned, so he traveled on to the Tree Stone, though the good beast did not follow him. When he arrived, the Allfather spoke to him. "The first trees are gone and must be replanted. Find the seed and plant the first tree." Avar traveled again through the Herstang forest, searching for the seeds for the first tree, but he could find none. Then he spoke to the tree spirits, the living trees. They told him that the seeds had been stolen by one of the Falmer, for they are the servants of the adversary, and this Falmer was hiding them in the deep forest, so that none would ever find them. Avar traveled to the deepest part of the forest, and there he found the evil Falmer, surrounded by the lesser tree spirits. Avar could see that the spirits were in his thrall, and that he used the magic of the seeds and spoken their secret name. Avar knew he could not stand against such a force, and that he must retrieve the seeds in secret. Avar reached into his pouch and drew out his flint. Gathering leaves, he started a small fire outside the clearing where the Falmer and the ensorcelled spirits milled. All the skull know the spirits' hatred of fires, for the fires ravage the trees they serve. At once, the nature of the spirits took hold, and they rushed to quell the flames. During the commotion, Avar snuck behind the Falmer and snatched the pouch of seeds, stealing away before the evil being knew they were gone. When Avar returned to the Tree Stone, He planted the tree in the ground, and the Allmaker spoke to him. The gift of trees is restored. Once again, the trees and plants will bloom and grow, and provide nourishment and shade. Avar was tired, for the sun would only burn, and the winds would not yet cool him. But he rested briefly in the shade of the trees. His legs were weary, and his eyes heavy, but he continued on, traveling to the Sunstone. Again, the Allmaker spoke. The gentle warmth of the sun is stolen, so now it only burns. Free the sun from the halls of penumbra. And so Avar walked west, over the frozen lands, until he reached the halls of penumbra. The air inside was thick and heavy, and he could see no farther than the end of his arm. Still, he felt his way along the walls, though he heard the shuffling of feet and knew that this place held the unholy beasts who would tear his flesh and eat his bones. For hours he crept along, until he saw a faint glow far at the end of the hall. There, from behind a sheet of perfect ice, came a glow so bright he had to shut his eyes, lest they be forever blinded. He plucked the flaming eye from one of the unholy beasts and threw it at the ice with all his might. A small crack appeared in the ice, then grew larger. Slowly, the light crept out between the cracks, widening them, splitting the ice wall into pieces. With a deafening crack, the wall crumbled, and the light rushed over Avar and through the halls. He heard the shrieks of the unholy beasts as they were blinded and burned. He ran out of the halls, following the light, and collapsed on the ground outside. When he was able to rise again, the sun again warmed him, and he was glad for that. He traveled back to the Sunstone where the Allmaker spoke to him. The gift of the sun is the skulls once again. It will warm them and give them light. Avar had one final gift he had to recover, the gift of the winds. So he traveled to the Windstone far on the western coast of the island. When he arrived, the Allmaker spoke to him, giving him his final task: find the greedy man and release the wind from its captivity. So Avar wandered the land in search of the greedy man. He looked in the trees, but the greedy man did not hide there. Nor did he hide near the oceans or the deep caves, and the beasts had not seen him in the dark forests. Finally, Avar came to a crooked house, and he knew that here he would find the greedy man. "Who are you?" shouted the greedy man, "that you would come to my house?" "I am Avar of the Skull," said Avar. "I am not warrior, shaman, or elder. If I do not return, I will not be missed. But I have returned the oceans and the earth, the trees, the beasts, and the sun, and I will return the winds to my people, that we may feel the spirit of the Allmaker in our souls again." And with that, he grabbed up the greedy man's bag and tore it open. The winds rushed out with gale force, sweeping the greedy man up and carrying him off, far from the island. Avar breathed in the winds and was glad. He walked back to the Windstone, where the Allmaker spoke to him a final time. "You have done well, Avar. You, the least of the Skull, have returned my gifts to them. The greedy man is gone for now, and should not trouble your people again in your lifetime. Your Allmaker is pleased. Go now and live according to your nature." And Avar started back to the Skull village. "And then what happened, grandfather?" "What do you mean, child? He went home." "No, when he returned to the village," the child continued. "Was he made a warrior or taught the ways of the shaman? Did he lead the Skull in battle?" "I do not know. That is where the story ends," said the grandfather. "But that is not an ending. That is not how stories end." The old man laughed and got up from his chair. "Is it not?" Like mentioned before, I love this story. It literally tells the player what to expect from these coming trials, and the ending is very relevant to the player's journey. The story of Avar is every Morrowind player's story. A nobody goes on the quest of a lifetime. Your skills are unique to your playstyle, but there's always a way to complete these trials, regardless of character build. The way the story ends is perfect too. There's no grand conclusion, there never is. Avar doesn't step into a big role, his tale never ends because the player's journey never ends either. There's always something that needs to be done. The Greedy Man sounds like an amazing antagonist for this expansion. However, I'm assuming as of right now that the Imperial Legion steps into this role. However, who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Back to the matter at hand, the next thing I looked at was the locations of the stones. Surprise, surprise, the stones are the very same ones that Avar needed to visit. They're spread out all over Solstheim, but a few of them are pretty close to the Skull Village. Interestingly, some of them aren't where the story said they'd be, namely the Windstone, which is to the north and not the west. In any case, the first one I visited was the Windstone. It wasn't the easiest to spot though. After being chased by a few Reekling raiders and meeting some new friends, I finally came across it. It was hidden amongst a whole field of stones, and the only way to tell that it's different is by the engravings on its southern side. Interacting with it, the game displayed a message, I guess from the Allfather, telling me to travel south and east of the Lake of Ice to Glenshul's tomb and free the winds from the greedy man's bag. Arriving at the lake and having a freak-out moment of being trapped under the ice, I soon stumbled onto the entrance of the tomb. Remember before when I mentioned that the Reekling Raiders were going to get difficult? Well, as it turns out, they have a natural, powerful Reflect Magicka ability that practically rends Hope's Fire and True Flame useless. Thankfully, my Daedra Claymore is able to pick up the slack, and it was off into Glenshul's tomb right after. In here, I came across possibly one of the most unnerving NPCs in Morrowind, Draugr. It's strange too because they're not intimidating whatsoever in Skyrim, but here, their movements are sporadic, they're incredibly quick, they make some terrifying noises, and they look more demonic. Thankfully though, they didn't hit hard, nor do they have a lot of health, so the dungeon was a breeze. Speaking of which, at the end of this smaller sized tomb, I found the greedy man's bag. Interacting with it, a big gust of wind was let out, to which the cave went dark and fell silent. This was the perfect jump scare opportunity, but lucky for me, it never came. What I didn't realize in the moment was that I needed to return to the stone in order to complete the trial. Thankfully, given its proximity to Skull Village, I'll just tag it on my way back. The next stone I sought out for was the Beast Stone. It was the closest one to the tomb and nearby the frozen lake. It also took me a while to find. I thought it was going to be in and around the rest of the rocks again, so I was scanning each boulder, searching for an engraving. Finally, after moving on from that idea, I spotted a spire-looking pillar off on its own. It was similar to the Windstone, just a lot taller. I saw a wolf etched onto its side, and I knew that it was the one. Interacting with it, it simply said, travel south, find the good beast, and ease its suffering. Running through the frozen lake into the other side, I witnessed a polar bear being attacked by several Reeklings. Figuring that this was my trial, I came flying in and began defending the beast. Luckily, it had all of the aggro, so all I had to do was supply the DPS. Once all of the little guys were defeated, I interacted with the good beast and removed the chitin arrow from its body. Interacting with it once more, it began to follow me, and I led it back to the stone. The bear was incredibly slow, so it took a while to get there, but luckily, I didn't encounter any more enemies on the way. Arriving at the spire, I received a journal update and watched on as a part of the oneness was restored. Again, I'll be getting back to that Windstone shortly. The next ritual I went for was the Tree Stone. This one was located in the center part of the island. After a few good leaps and a few enemy takedowns, I finally arrived. Interacting with it, the game sent a message saying, the first trees are gone. Travel east and find the one who has stolen the seeds. Beware, he who has the seeds controls the trees. Plant the first anew. Walking a brief distance to the east, I saw what appeared to be my trial. A Reekling was standing amidst a group of 5 Spriggans. The Reekling had the seeds, and the Spriggans were its guardians. Wanting to do this methodically, I cast a ranged fire spell, targeting one of the 5, in hopes of pulling just a few. It worked, and only 2 of them ran over. Again, due to my level and gear, I don't find Spriggans difficult per se, but their revival feature is annoying, and to essentially take on 15 of them isn't something I want to do at once. Trying the method again, this time I ended up pulling the rest of the group, so it was going to be a 4-on-1. Remaining calm, securing the Reekling kill, and working each Spriggan down, the fight was soon over. I learned after that if you isolate the Reekling, kill it first, and take the seeds, the Spriggans won't harm you. I suppose there's nothing wrong with working on your skills though. With the seeds in hand, I walked back to the stone, ready to move on, yet nothing happened. Unsure of where to go from here, I began wandering around and soon enough, hit a spot where the game prompted me to plant the seeds. After doing so, I then returned to the stone, interacted with it, and restored part of the oneness. With that, there are only 3 trials left, and soon, I'll be able to receive some answers on what happened to Captain Garius, and why there are werewolves on this island.